It's a real privilege to speak here tonight alongside the courageous members of Iraq Veterans Against the War and alongside others who are committed to telling the truth about the illegal and unjust occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan and who are working to end those occupations. I would like to make 5 basic points about the 2 occupations, and then I'd like to draw 5 broader conclusions about the geopolitical considerations that I see driving U.S. policy. First, it's important to remind ourselves that the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan were launched on false pretenses, and also to underscore that they continue on false pretenses. The Bush administration attacked Iraq, claiming it was preempting the threat posed by Iraq's weapons of mass destruction and its connections to al-Qaeda. Today, we know the full extent of manipulation of intelligence that was used to start a war that was offensive, not defensive in nature. In Afghanistan, Washington claimed to be carefully targeting terrorists who had attacked the United States, but instead targeted the civilian population of Afghanistan in an open form of collective punishment, which is banned under international law. The war's planners consciously sought to make the general population of Afghanistan suffer, hoping that would help bring down the Taliban regime and also to make an example of Afghanistan. And I think the organizers of this weekend's gathering should be commended that the banner behind us reads Iraq and Afghanistan, because all too often Afghanistan has become the forgotten occupation. Or worse, it has somehow become the good occupation to which we can contrast Iraq. And it's very important that IVAW is bringing the issue of Afghanistan into the discussion, not only because of how it's affecting the people of Afghanistan, but because so many of the soldiers, the troops that have fought in Iraq, also have had field experience in Afghanistan, and also so many of the people that you meet organizing among GIs, among veterans, have had their primary military experience in Afghanistan. They opposed the occupation there, and we have to find a way of involving them in our work, connecting these 2 vital issues. Second, the United States is not stemming, but is in fact fueling sectarian and civil conflict in both countries. In Afghanistan and Iraq, Washington has armed militias that are involved in attacks on civilians, using alliances with the United States to gain money and weapons, and also to call in airstrikes and ground attacks to settle political and sectarian scores. In Afghanistan, as the analyst Stephen Zunis notes, the United States subcontracted security of much of the country to warlords who have actually served to destabilize the country. The United States has used classic colonial divide and rule tactics in both countries for the same reason that all occupations of necessity must: to control and impose the occupier's will upon a population that will not consent to its subjugation. This means the violence we have seen, the torture and homicides at Bagram and Abu Ghraib and beyond, are the logical result, are in fact the inevitable outcome of U.S. policy at the highest levels. The violence does not have its origin in the ideas of the troops or a few bad apples, but emanates from the political leadership and policy set at the top of the chain of command, and from the systematic violence and racism of both occupations. And as we have heard in testimony today, they stem from rules of engagement that guarantee civilians will be degraded, dehumanized, tortured, and killed. Third, the U.S. is not confronting terrorism by staying in Iraq or Afghanistan, as we're often told. The main enemy that the U.S. is confronting in both countries is not al-Qaeda, but the very people we claim to have liberated. As Army Captain Dan Kearney told the New York Times Magazine, speaking about the occupation of Afghanistan, the only reason anyone's listening to me is because I'm dropping bombs on them. In Iraq, poll after poll, including polling done by the U.S. government itself through the State Department and other agencies it's employed, has found that the Iraqis say that they want an end to the occupation, that they view us as occupiers, not as liberators, that they feel less safe, not more safe as a result of our presence, and they see us as the main source of instability and the main source of sectarian conflict in their country. And let's be clear, this is not a question of mismanagement, of bad planning, or of lack of planning, or an error in this or that counterinsurgency strategy. Is it a political, fundamental reality of the occupation? As long as we remain, we will be the source of the instability and the violence. Fourth, the United States is not honoring those who died in Iraq and Afghanistan by continuing the occupations, as President Bush claims. Now more than 4,400 U.S. troops have died in Iraq and Afghanistan. In addition, though this number is rarely mentioned, more than 1,000 private contractors have been killed alongside U.S. forces, as well as scores of journalists, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis dead. More than 29,000 U.S. troops have been wounded, many severely. Rates of post-traumatic stress disorder among Iraq and Afghanistan veterans have skyrocketed, as have suicide rates, among many other problems that people have discussed and given personal testimony about in this hearing. Each additional death and injury only compounds the senseless tragedy we have seen so far. Fifth, the United States is not rebuilding or bringing democracy to either country. Despite the billions of dollars Congress has allocated for reconstruction efforts, electricity and access to safe drinking water are below pre-invasion levels in Iraq. Unemployment has skyrocketed as a result of conscious policy decisions taken by the occupation authorities. Inflation is spiraling, again as a result of conscious economic decisions made by the occupation, putting basic necessities out of reach of most Iraqis. Hospitals are in shambles. And Iraq today has the world's largest and fastest growing refugee crisis, with more than 2.2 million internally displaced and more than 2.2 million externally displaced Iraqis. Child malnutrition in Iraq has grown worse. The UN, the United Nations, reports that 1 in 4 Iraqi children under 5 now suffers chronic malnourishment, and more than 4 million Iraqis are in need of food assistance. But the country's food ration program is being eliminated as part of the neoliberal reconstruction of Iraq under the direction of the U.S. occupation. In Afghanistan, only 6% of the population has electricity at any point in the day, according to the Asian Development Bank. And Action Aid International estimates that only 14% of U.S. aid to Afghanistan has reached legitimate development projects. Now, women's oppression in Afghanistan, which we should remember was cited by many proponents of the invasion of Afghanistan as a reason why this was a humanitarian, why this was a just war, is as bad and in some cases worse than before the invasion. The independent newspaper in London recently reported that, quote, grinding poverty and the escalating war is driving an increasing number of Afghan families to sell their daughters into forced marriages. Girls as young as 6 are being married into a life of slavery and rape, often by multiple members of their new relatives. Banned from seeing their own parents or siblings, they are also prohibited from going to school. With little effective recourse, many of the victims are driven to self-immolation, burning themselves to death or severe self-harm. Civilian casualties in Iraq are now at post-invasion highs, thanks in part to an expanded U.S. air war, a model we now see being applied with greater frequency in Iraq. To give a figure, between January and September 2007 alone, U.S. and NATO coalition allies dropped 1 million pounds of ordnance on Afghanistan. That's more than double the entire year of 2006, the figure for 2006. To those who argue we broke it, so we must fix it, Rather than fixing the two countries, we are only breaking them further. And to those who say we cannot withdraw precipitously, there's nothing precipitous about pulling out after 5 years, or in the case of Afghanistan, 7 years of occupying another country illegally. We have no right to be in either country in the first place. Senator John McCain said recently, troops may have to stay in Iraq for 100 or 1,000 or even 10,000 years, he said. His position's clear. But I think we have to acknowledge as well that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidates, also would not end the occupation of Iraq or of Afghanistan. As the Wall Street Journal reported on February 29th, despite the rhetoric of the Democratic presidential candidates, significant numbers of